For the first time in human history, our global population is projected to shrink.
Basically, what we've seen over the last few decades is rich countries' fertility rates falling. You've seen that especially clearly in East Asia. You know, you'd have to have been living under a rock to have not heard this about Japan, South Korea, China. But it's a lot of rich countries as well, really all of the world's rich countries. But the really interesting trend, I think, in recent years is the number of much lower income countries that are starting to fall below that replacement level. You can see on the chart, India, they're not a rich country at all. India had a fertility rate of about 3.5 at the turn of the century. It had a fertility rate of 60 years ago. It's now sub-replacement rate. It's true of most of South America. It's true of a large part of the rest of the world. And really the only countries with above replacement fertility rates now are in Central Asia. There's a big sweep of countries there, and in sub-Saharan Africa, where you still get some very high fertility rates. But it's an increasingly small group of countries that are actually above that 2.1 level.
The single biggest threat to the global financial system is not war, national debt, inflation, or a market crash. It's the fact that humanity is getting old.
By the year 2100, nearly every country on Earth may face the same challenge: more people dying than being born. For the first time in human history, our global population is projected to shrink. Humans have been on an upward trajectory for centuries. By the 10th century, our numbers hovered around a few hundred million. The Industrial Revolution pushed us past 1 billion by 1900, and we crossed the 8 billion mark in late 2022. But according to new research from the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation at the University of Washington, published in The Lancet, that climb is about to reverse. The projections are stark. By 2050, approximately 155 out of 204 countries will not have enough births to maintain a stable population. By 2100, that number rises to 198 countries. Dr. Stein Emil Volset, a professor at the Institute, calls this their most comprehensive population analysis to date. So, what does a less crowded planet actually mean for humanity? Economists warn that shrinking workforces could strain tax bases and slow productivity. Healthcare systems would need to adapt to serve growing elderly populations with fewer young workers to provide care.
When you think about a decline in the human population, an obvious question comes to mind. Is this why the rapid development of AI and robotics is taking place, in order to fill the gap between the number of humans we have on the planet now who are enabling systems to work and the projected deficits of humans that we might have in the future? Across the developed world, birth rates have collapsed below replacement levels. Prime working age populations are shrinking. Healthcare budgets are buckling, and entitlement programs like Social Security are facing insolvency. There's simply not enough people to make these programs work. For decades, economists viewed aging as an inevitable force of nature, but Silicon Valley views it as something entirely different, a bug in the human source code that can be patched.
For years, two things have been true. The world's population is increasing and its birth rate is falling. South Korea already had the world's lowest birth rate, but this week, new data showed it had fallen further. Japan also recorded a new low.
The
decline of births is in a state of crisis. I believe we are at a time when we have to take urgent measures.
The birth rate is the average number of children that each woman has, and when birth rates are discussed, you'll see this number a lot, 2.1. This is the birth rate needed to maintain population levels. South Korea's not close. Last year, its rate was 0.72. Japan is at 1.26. To put this in context, the EU average is 1.53 and the UK is at 1.49, and that is a record low. In fact, many countries are now below 2.1.
Even countries with relatively high birth rates are often at half the birth rate of what they were. And the average person now lives in a country in the world that has a lower than replacement fertility rate.
And birth rates matter because they contribute to long-term changes in our populations and the consequences that follow. Low birth rates can cause populations to fall. Japan's is expected to decrease by 30% by 2070, South Korea's to halve by the end of the century. In some countries, including the UK, the situation is different. Populations are projected to increase, mainly because of immigration. But immigration can't counter all the impacts of a low birth rate.
There is no quick fix. There is no one fix to population decline or population aging. So birth rates affect population growth in the long run, whereas immigration can affect in the short run. But immigrants also age.
And as people live longer, combined with low birth rates, elderly people will make up a greater proportion of the population, as we've seen in Japan.
It's no surprise that Japan, which has had this very, very long, very low fertility rate and the oldest population in the world, has got the worst government finances in the developed world, because the government is indeed spending more and more on healthcare and pensions and has fewer and fewer taxpayers.
If that's Japan, in the UK, a shift in the makeup of the population is coming. By 2070, the number of workers is projected to rise by 1 million. The number of pensioners will rise by 5 million. This will inevitably create pressures. The Economist argues that for countries with low birth rates, the implications are higher taxes, later retirements, lower real returns for savers, and possibly government budget crises.
Right now, tech titans and venture capital funds, they're pouring tens of billions of dollars into longevity biotech, from cellular reprogramming and senolytics to AI-driven drug discovery. Don't get me wrong, this is not about rich billionaires and celebrities living forever. This is about unlocking the longevity dividend, an economic shift that could save global capital markets and push humanity to its next civilizational horizon. So to understand why capital is pouring into longevity science, you've got to take a look at the math as it relates to the world's major economies. In high and middle income nations, the ratio of active workers to retirees is hitting historical lows. When a society's workforce shrinks while its elderly care costs skyrocket, economic productivity stalls. Traditional monetary policy can't print more 30-year-old engineers or doctors. For centuries, nations drove economic growth through population expansion. Now, that demographic engine is stalling. If we can't grow the number of humans on the planet, then the only macroeconomic alternative is to increase the health span of the humans that are here. In other words, increase the number of years a person remains healthy, productive, and biologically young.
Welcome, everyone. The mission of New Limit is to radically extend human health span, and we've been hard at work over the past year. We've got some exciting updates for you today. Now imagine with me just for a moment, what if you had the immune system, the mental ability, the metabolism even of a younger person? I think that all of us in this room would be a customer of that product if it existed, at least at a certain age. It would also be one of the most important achievements ever for humanity. The New Limit was founded with this observation that all the major diseases that take us out later in life, whether that's cancer or cardiovascular disease or diabetes, these are all highly correlated with age. And it makes sense intuitively because as we get older, our cells lose function. They're unable to recover from damage or insults, or maybe the errant cancerous cell that appears when we're 20, our immune system is able to correct it. When we get older, maybe it's not. And so what if we were able to actually restore function that our cells had when they were younger? Could this actually be a way to go fix the root cause of many of these diseases?
This is where money meets biology. Instead of treating age-related diseases one by one, like heart disease, Alzheimer's, or cancer, Longevity Biotech targets the root causes of aging itself. Take epigenetic reprogramming. By using specific proteins called Yamanaka factors, scientists are learning how to dial back the biological clock of damaged cells without wiping away their identity. So, who are some of the players in this space? Altos Labs launched with $3 billion in capital to focus on cellular rejuvenation. Retro Biosciences, backed by $180 million from Sam Altman, he of OpenAI fame, aims to add 10 healthy years to human life. New Limit, co-founded by Coinbase's Brian Armstrong, recently scaled massive funding rounds targeted and focused toward epigenetic reprogramming. And it's important to note this is not science fiction. Human clinical trials involving partial epigenetic reprogramming, they're already underway, transitioning this field from theoretical biology into regulated endpoint-driven medicine. Let's zoom out to the civilizational scale. According to the Kardashev scale, a type 1 civilization doesn't just master planetary energy, it masters planetary resource management. And the single most valuable resource on Earth isn't oil, it's not gold or silicon, it's human cognitive capital. Right now, human beings take roughly 25 to 30 years just to master complex fields like quantum physics, fusion engineering, or deep space navigation. Then, just as they reach peak wisdom and expertise, these humans, they biologically decay. That starts to set in, and eventually these humans die. Imagine a world where a top scientist, founder, or engineer doesn't lose their mental and physical acuity at age 65, but maintains peak biological output for 120 years or more. Now, listen, I understand perfectly what question you may have. Is this going to be reserved for the so-called elite in society? Well, as this research progresses, it will definitely start out being more expensive, just like every technology does. Cost will fall as it becomes more widely available, but then it leads into a philosophical question of whether or not you even want to have a longer lifespan. Many people will probably be very comfortable with the roughly 80 years we're granted already. And that's because there are other factors besides just health that lead to a quality of life. There are relationships, experiences. To the extent you're not able to endeavor in either of those, that may cause you to be comfortable with a normal human lifespan. By eliminating the biological tax called aging, human knowledge stops resetting every few decades. Intellectual compound interest skyrockets. Extending the healthy human lifespan isn't just a medical breakthrough, it's actually the fuel required for a civilization to solve really big questions, such as fusion, deep space travel, and planetary engineering, just to name a few. Economists calculate that extending healthy human life expectancy by just one single year is worth over $38 trillion to the global economy in saved healthcare costs and sustained productivity. Extending the human lifespan by a decade would yield hundreds of trillions of dollars in productivity and savings. Of course, the road ahead has major hurdles. Regulatory pathways, including the FDA and global regulators, currently classifying aging as a natural process, not a disease. This complicates clinical trial approvals. Equity and access. The risk of initial therapies being exclusive to high net worth individuals before scaling down to generic mass marketing availability. This one issue has the potential to really create a divided society among humanity, one in which you have those who are closer to immortality on this earth than others. And that would create all kinds of issues with class warfare. Finally, clinical execution. Reprogramming cells too aggressively risks cellular dysfunction or tumor formation. This requires extreme precision. Silicon Valley, they're not just betting billions on longevity because of vanity. They're betting on it because biological aging is the ultimate bottleneck to human economic, technological, and maybe even spiritual growth. If we can solve aging, or just extend lifespans by a few years, we can solve the global labor crisis, fund our entitlement systems, and unlock centuries of compound human intelligence. I know that this is a fringe topic, and I know that there are going to be some strong opinions about it. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'll talk to you soon.